district program. Okay. Waiting for that. Try it again. Good evening and welcome to Interfaith Families, Clans and Pitfalls. I'm Wendy Black, Chair of the Pacific District Program Committee. Intermarriage has been estimated at 50% among Jews. Additionally, a Pew Research study found that among intermarried Jews, 28% raised children with a Jewish religious identity, and another 29% raised their children as what Pew calls Jews of no religion or secular Jews. How we handle intermarriage is unique to each of us. Speaking from personal experience, I always thought of myself as liberal until my only child married a lapsed Catholic. It was difficult going for years, although eventually my daughter-in-law converted just 3 days before the B'nai Mitzvah of her eldest child. The potential roadblocks to smooth relationship within interfaith families can be many, and tonight we have an accomplished guest to help guide us. Rabbi Cookie Lee Olshine is a senior rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Tempe, Arizona. A former attorney and Nevada State District law clerk, Rabbi Olshine is affiliated with 18 Doors, a nonprofit that assists interfaith families. She has an extensive background in interfaith issues. Rabbi Olshine received an Interfaith New Clergy Program Fellowship from Chautauqua Institution and is a member of its Interfaith Clergy Alumni Program leadership team. At her previous congregation in West Palm Beach, she created an ongoing partnership with a group known as Cross Ministries, Christians Reaching Out to Society. She also has worked on social justice issues with the American Jewish World Service. Before we hear from Rabbi Olshine, we'd like to hear from you on your interfaith experiences in this short poll. And Melissa Jacobitz will take it over now. Melissa?
All right, I'm going to launch the poll. Please choose your answers and hit submit. We'll leave it up for a couple of minutes. Okay, give it another half a minute or so. Okay, it looks like everybody has submitted their answers to all the questions, so I'm going to end the poll. And I will share the results. Wendy, would you like me to share the results now?
Yes, please do.
Okay. All right, can you see them?
Yes.
All right, are we done with that?
Yep.
That was very interesting. A lot of grandparents of interfaith children. Thanks for your replies. Now it's my honor to introduce Rabbi Cookie Lee Olshine.
Hi, everyone. So I know several of you here on screen, and I want to just say thank you, first of all, to Wendy Black for inviting me to come and share. Thank you for reaching out to 18 Doors. I've been affiliated with 18 Doors for the past 5 years now, I think it is, 4 or 5 years. And for those of you who might not be familiar with 18 Doors, it is formerly known as interfaithfamily.com. 18 Doors has the most widest interfaith I would say the most resources online of any organization. So go to 18doors.org. If you, I hate to say this, but if you want great recipes, if you want great articles, first-person articles about what it means to be in an interfaith relationship, if you want great articles about following up on tonight's conversation, just looking for more information. If you want, if someone in your family is looking for an officiant for a baby naming, a bris, marriage. We have an amazing officiation registry at 18 Doors, and you'll get literally, you put all your information in, you get a list of a bunch of people who are friendly to doing interfaith life cycle events. So it's an amazing resource. So let me just say this. I want to tell you my interfaith experience first, and then I have some information I want to share with you. If you have a burning question, put it in the chat. If you really need to stop and say, we need to interrupt, raise your hand this way or the old-fashioned way of going to reactions and then raise hand function. This should be a conversation. It's too important and too serious for us to have to not to be able to answer your questions along the way and hear your comments and hear your experiences as well. But there is dedicated time at the end for our Q&A and discussion. So I want to start with my family. My parents were two very nice Jewish folks from upstate New York. They fell in love, they got married, I showed up, my brother showed up. And as I always say, two Jews does not necessarily make a happy marriage. And so my parents got divorced, and my mom fell in love again, and she got married the second time. My parents married in upstate New York, and I was born in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. So a little bit different location. When my mom fell in love in Georgia, she happened to fall in love with a Southern Baptist man from Alabama. So it couldn't have been, I don't think it could have been any more different in our household. But we went from being a two Jewish parent household to an interfaith family overnight. So I have both situations in my family. So I have an interesting perspective. When I decided to become a rabbi, one of the things that was really important to me was making the decision, was I going to officiate at interfaith marriages? And I decided that I couldn't imagine not officiating at my mom's wedding, that it was personal, and how could I say no? That I needed, as a rabbi, to figure out a way to authentically be me as a rabbi and be able to officiate at interfaith events. So that's kind of my background when it comes to interfaith. Along the way, you can imagine I'm in my 15th year of being a rabbi now, and I am now getting calls from my bar and bat mitzvah kids saying, hey, Rabbi, will you do my wedding? As Wendy mentioned, 50%, the Pew Research study from 2013 said 50% of Jews were marrying non-Jews in 2013. And even in cities where we think of as having high Jewish populations, the numbers are very high there too. So like in Boston in 2015, there was a study and there was 47% were intermarried at that point. Toronto, which is an incredibly strong Jewish community, has about a 30% intermarriage rate, which might seem low to us, but for Toronto to have a 30% intermarriage rate is an incredibly high number. And that was from a 2020 study. So just to put this in context, as we are discussing interfaith relationships, almost all of you mentioned that there's somebody interfaith. You know, there's almost always someone that we love that's part of our family that's not Jewish. So the title talked about plans and pitfalls, and so I want to talk to you about a study that was done in Pittsburgh in 2019. So it was right before the pandemic. It was out of Pittsburgh. There are three major studies that have been done in the interfaith world, mostly through Jewish federations. 18 Doors has partnered with some of them as well. But the study in Pittsburgh in 2019 talked about creating points of entry for interfaith families, creating points of entry. You see, it's really tough for young couples to actually walk through the door and say, hi, we're interfaith. Will you be our rabbi? And what is it that causes that to happen? Even before they walk through a synagogue door, they've probably had lots of conversations about what does it mean to not be of the same faith tradition. And the Jewish partner has probably had a conversation, although not always, but probably has had a conversation with one or both of their parents. I'm going to stereotype for a moment and say usually their mothers, about what are you going to do about the kids? What are you going to do for holidays? What are you going to do? And I dare say if I asked each and every one of you to raise your hands right now, and if you have children, how many of you actually had those conversations with your kids, either as a teenager or a young adult? So if you decide to marry somebody who's not Jewish, where are you going to spend the holidays? Are you going to have a Christmas tree? What are you going to do about raising your children? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I see some smiles. So here we are. We've got 4 major points of entry that are considered to be critical in interfaith families. One is that moment before marriage, when they're making decisions, when maybe they're getting some pressure from the Jewish side of the family to either marry someone who's Jewish, or if this was 30 or 40 years ago, back then, if a nice Jewish boy was marrying a non-Jewish girl, oftentimes his mother would pressure her into converting, or pressure him into pressuring her into converting. How many women do we know that got married and converted in the same week? We had a lot of those 40 years ago. Sometimes the timing is just, it just happens to be that somebody falls in love with someone Jewish and they go through conversion and they happen to be Jewish before the wedding. I know many people actually do that, but sometimes, and especially 40 or 50 years ago, there was a lot of pressure into marrying a nice Jewish girl. So in that moment before marriage, that's one of those critical entry points. And how we respond as a Jewish community, how we respond as family members can vary widely, as you know. We've had a problem in the past of people being turned away from the Jewish community for weddings, for example. And maybe even some of you here on the screen today were turned away. And what we've done when we turned people away, oftentimes, is we have created a nice Unitarian family. Because that nice Unitarian Universalist minister down the street was happy to do the wedding of a Jewish person and a non-Jewish person. And that's where they felt welcomed, and that's where they felt accepted, and that's where they found their community. Nowadays, the Reform movement allows every rabbi to make a decision for themselves, and there still are some Reform rabbis who do not perform interfaith weddings. However, the great majority, my guess is about 90%, do perform interfaith weddings. The conservative movement is very different. The conservative movement still has, through its rabbinical assembly, which is the rabbinic organization like the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the CCAR. The rabbinical assembly actually does not allow conservative rabbis to this day to perform interfaith weddings. And so I've done multiple interfaith weddings for my conservative colleagues who could not officiate. By the way, they're not even supposed to attend. They're not even supposed to attend, which is a real challenge. I just got a question in the chat about the interfaith weddings that I do, and so I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. The Reconstructionist movement is more liberal, and some of their rabbis do interfaith weddings, some don't. Renewal is very liberal. Most of their rabbis do interfaith weddings, and of course, Orthodox, all the different brands of Orthodox, you won't find interfaith weddings there. So for me, since I was asked this question, do I use the same words at a Jewish wedding and an interfaith wedding? I actually use very close to the same words, but I don't use exactly the same words. There is a legal formula when two Jews marry each other that says that we are committing ourselves according to the laws of Moses and Israel. And I do all of it except for the according to the laws of Moses and Israel, because it doesn't make sense to ask a non-Jewish partner to say those words out loud. And so when I'm doing a wedding, first of all, I only do Jewish ceremonies, but I don't include those few words according to the laws of Moses and Israel. I say that I'm ordained by Hebrew Union College to do Jewish ceremonies. So I hope that that answers Shelley's question in the chat. When I'm going to go through these 4 entry points, and then I'll come back to some other topics as well. But before I do, I realized I want to be careful. There's some language you should know about that's coming into fashion right now. So we have interfaith families, and now we're talking about families that are dual faith or even multi-faith, dual faith and multi-faith. So what does that mean? So that means that a couple, when they decide to stay together, they have the talk. By the way, every interfaith family should have the talk. You'd be surprised how many people avoid it because of fear, and then they end up with a 5-year-old down the road. And then they, what do you mean you want your children, my children to go to church? Wait, I thought they were going to be raised Jewish. I'm a Jewish mom. That's who I am. So if people don't have those conversations before committing to the marriage, it can really be devastating. So nowadays people are having those conversations, and rabbis are asking people to have the conversations. And people are coming up with this idea of dual faith or multi-faith. So what does that mean? It means that people are sometimes practice 2 religions in the same household with great respect for one another. Multi-faith. The children will practice both religions. Now, rabbis for generations and generations have said that this will confuse the children, and it will cause the children to have to choose between mommy and daddy, mommy's religion or daddy's religion. Unfortunately, we have not had enough research done to actually say what is the impact of a child being raised in a dual faith or a multi-faith setting. And what does it mean to have to choose between mom and dad? The research just hasn't been done longitudinally yet to be able to give us those answers, except to say that oftentimes the Pew study has been given as an answer where it talks about, as Wendy mentioned, about Jews of no religion as being an option, or people who say, well, I'm both religions. So how do we deal with that? Hopefully we deal with that by asking lots of questions, having a professional ask lots of questions. If you want to do anything in the world to make your non-Jewish daughter-in-law or son-in-law never convert to Judaism, you ask lots of questions and pressure them. That has been my finding in all of my anecdotal situations, that when there are parents that are very, very pushy about conversion to Judaism, people tend to put the brakes on, even if they were interested in learning more about Judaism, and people stop wanting to learn. So let's talk about the other 3 points of entry for a minute. The first one after marriage is, so if we've connected, hopefully, with a couple who is in an interfaith relationship, maybe at the time of marriage, hopefully they found, if they want, they found a rabbi to officiate at their ceremony, and hopefully they've been welcomed into the community. Nowadays, as you know, though, there are often couples who are finding friends to do weddings, and that is in every religion. We're hearing that more and more from our Christian friends as well, that people just go get a one-day license, and so that's where we are. That's just, I hate to say it, that's just young people these days. Lots of friends doing their officiation. So our next stop is right before wanting to have children or right after children are born. So this is sort of another trigger time where people say, ooh, we have to do something about religion now. So before children are born or when going through fertility, that is another moment. And then the naming ceremony, or the bris, the Brit Milah, that is another opportunity. And finding ways to help people can be challenging. So I don't co-officiate at events, and I don't, thankfully, I will tell you, I have not had the case come to me yet about a family that wants to have both a baptism and a naming ceremony. I thankfully have not had that happen, but I do know that turning people away from Judaism one time will decrease their chances of becoming affiliated later. And so it's a very difficult question that some of my friends have had to answer. What do you do? I think I would err on the side of going ahead and giving a piece of Jewish tradition to hold on to, and doing a naming ceremony. I don't know, though. It would depend on the circumstance. So marriage, birth. The next point of entry that people say, oh, wait, we need to do something Jewishly is preschool, right? Tot Shabbat time, preschool, thinking about religious school, that critical time between like 3-ish and let's say 7 or 8. That's the next time. And trying to find a religious school, even in the Reform movement, that will accept children that are being raised in a multi-faith or a dual faith tradition is actually hard. There is an old teshuva in the Reform movement that says that children who are born of patrilineal descent, patrilineal as opposed to matrilineal descent, will be considered Jewish if they have participated in major life cycle events, right? Like a Brit Milah, a bris, a baby naming as a child, and they've received a Jewish education exclusively. And so that becomes a little bit of a challenge, because if a kid is going to Sunday school on some Sundays, as I have seen happen, in a Jewish religious school, and going to church school on some Sundays, especially this happens when there's a divorce, it can become a problem to find a religious school that will accept a child that is receiving a dual education. It is up to each synagogue to make those decisions, whether or not these children will be accepted, in consultation with their rabbis, of course. And there are places where the rules are just hard and fast about children only being involved in a Jewish religious school setting. What are we doing for those families, or those parts of the families where the family actually wants their child to receive Jewish education in addition to a church or a mosque education? Are we sending people away? And how do we overcome that? Okay. And of course, the fourth piece is bar bat mitzvah. So usually we get a little wake up call in 4th or 5th grade when the kids hit and they realize, sometimes it happens at the age of 13 where we get a phone call. Actually, it happens lots of times. We get a phone call when a child is 12 years old and saying, no, my child's never had any Jewish education. We're in an interfaith relationship, and my child wants to have a bar bat mitzvah ceremony. So that's another area where we can create meaningful entry points for families so that they can celebrate a child coming of age within our tradition. But we have to think about different ways to be flexible, to be creative, in order to welcome these families into our congregations. Wendy put in the chat about bringing up their children or grandchildren Jewish. Years before your daughter-in-law decided to convert, they decided to have a bris, a Brit Milah. It was traditional, performed by a pediatrician who was certified as a Reform moil. And that has been a wonderful addition in the Reform movement, having people who are certified by the Reform movement as moil, or a mahelet, the women that perform Brit Milah. And so thinking in terms of how we can be as inclusive as possible, we're finding that the Reform movement's doctors who are certified, in some ways, because this has been going on now 30 years, have even been more open to serving people of all backgrounds in some ways than some of the rabbis had when this program began. So really interesting. I'm going to stop right there. I do want to go back to one comment and just and really ask you more about your experiences and what your thoughts are about how we, and this is the challenge for rabbis, how do we maintain our boundaries as to who is a Jew and yet really walk the talk of being a Reform movement that is welcoming, that doesn't put up barriers for entry to those people who might not make the same choices we did about who they fell in love with. How do we make it so that every child can get a Jewish education and every interfaith family can feel welcome, not just as a guest in our communities, but feel at home?
Rabbi, can you first address? There are a lot of women here who have grandparent interfaith children.
Yeah.
I were interfaith and became Jewish. But anyone who's done this knows there's a very thin line. And can you please address
Sure.
how your experiences in this?
So I've spoken to a lot of Jewish grandparents who are concerned about their grandchildren in particular, about their grandchildren either having no education, no Jewish education in the home, or having both a Jewish Christian experience and even a Jewish Muslim experience. It's much more rare, obviously, but it is not unheard of in today's society. So one, I tell people, and this is sometimes controversial, but don't be afraid of a Christmas tree. Don't be afraid of our Jewish grandchildren celebrating Christmas with their non-Jewish relatives. Christmas, in most instances, is not religious in America today. It is a secular holiday, and so we've got to stop being afraid of a Christmas tree. We need to have honest conversations about what does it mean to be exposed to different holidays and supporting our kids and our grandchildren. So an honest conversation is one that is not pushy. It is one where you practice just the right amount of curiosity, okay? And that's the difficulty, just the right amount of curiosity. So we have, here in my congregation in Tempe, we have many Jewish grandchildren who are brought to the synagogue by their Jewish grandparents for religious school, and in fact are financially supporting the family's membership and their grandchildren's religious school tuition. But please hear me one more time, and one more time, and one more time. Think about the difference between pushy and advocating. Pushy, people tend to push back. Advocating for giving your grandchild bearings in this world, like Jewish lenses through which to view the world, that's a completely different thing. But when we border on the realm of pushy, that's when people start to push back, and that is never helpful for the Jewish people or your relationship with your child or your in-law. Is that helpful, Wendy?
Yes, and I really like to hear about other people's experiences in
Yeah.
grandparenting.
Yeah. Well, let me answer Shelley's comment in a boundary of who is a Jew. Young couples ask if their son can be Jewish if there is no Brit Milah or there's no bris. So in the Reform movement, let me step back. In the Orthodox world, if there's no bris and you have a baby boy, there is no Jewish male, no Jewish man. It's a requirement. In the liberal movements, we're having conversations about whether or not Brit Milah is required. Those are very progressive conversations, but they are happening. There are some areas in our country, particularly in San Francisco, where there is an anti-circ movement, anti-circumcision movement, and there are Jews who are choosing to have naming ceremonies for their sons, just like their daughters. And we are an egalitarian movement, so it's kind of hard to argue against that, understanding the tradition of requiring circumcision as part of a Brit Milah ceremony, bris ceremony. So can your child be Jewish if there is no bris? It depends on the community that you're entering into. In an Orthodox community, it's never going to happen. But there's a part of me, I don't walk around asking people when they join our synagogue, are you circumcised? Mm. I don't do that for the men. I don't do that for the boys in religious school. So it really depends on what community you're seeking to join. An Orthodox community might say, did you have your child circumcised on day 8, or was there a medical excuse not to? That actually is a question, but in the liberal tradition, we have a different set of standards. It's really about participating in life cycle events, and it's about Jewish education. With respect to patrilineal descent, I think what we're going to find in the next 10 years is that there will be teshuvas or legal opinions that are written by the Reform movement. They are not considered to be law in the same way that they are in Orthodox situations, but they're meant to be guiding, because each community through their rabbi makes decisions about who can become a member. I don't know one Reform congregation that says, are you circumcised? So
Can you address how one of the things that I felt that I was surprised was that I had failed as a parent
Mm,
because and then I really screwed it up saying, and I will tell people for if in case this has not happened yet, what not to do.
yeah.
I said to her, well, I wanted my son to marry somebody Jewish, but if you make him happy, that's great. They never forgave me. I mean, this was
Yeah.
awful. This was textbook how not to handle it. But I felt like
Yeah.
I was born a few years after World War II. So my experience is that way. But I just felt this like it's going to end with me. There's nobody else who had children,
Yeah.
among my siblings. How do you balance that with the reality of you're still the grandmother, they still may grow up to be decent human beings?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm gonna tell all of you here on this call that um, that your children are probably disappointed you before they fell in love with someone who wasn't Jewish, and maybe they're going to disappoint you again after they might fall in love with somebody who isn't Jewish. And what we need to do is we need to create situations where their partner, their non-Jewish partner, falls in love with being Jewish too, right? That we support everything that they do that's the tiniest bit Jewish friendly. Okay? And we create what some people are now calling Jewish adjacent people. Jewish adjacent is a new term that we're starting to hear. Some people don't like it, but what does it mean? It means that, I hate to use the word Judeophile because the ending of that word has taken on some bad connotations, but people who love Jewish people, right? We want to invite them into the practice of Judaism in a positive way, such that by the time, if they do have grandchildren who are going to school, religious school, and are becoming bar bat mitzvah, I can't tell you the number of parents I have converted on the eve of a bar bat mitzvah ceremony because their non-Jewish spouse, non-Jewish parent, has been living a Jewish life for many, many, many years, and they've fallen in love with the ethics, the values, the holidays. They've been living a Jewish life anyway, and they're like, I should make this official now. And it happens more often when I ask the question, did you ever feel pressured? And they say, never felt pressured. I came to this all on my own. That's an important question, right? Because if somebody does feel pressured, when I stand with them at the mikveh or in front of the open ark with the Torah in their hand for conversion, and I say, are you doing this of your own free will and not because anyone is pressuring you? They can honestly say yes. So if you want your non-Jewish in-law to child-in-law to eventually convert, you need to set them up for, are you doing this for out of your own free will and for no one else? You have to have your part in that too, right? Um, I also want to share that, there was this whole generation of women that were forced to convert in order to marry Jewish men. And when divorce happened, many of them went back to whatever they were doing before, right? They felt like they did it for their husbands. They did it so they could get married. And that's not what we do now, right? We don't force anybody to convert. We don't pressure anybody to convert because we didn't like it when people were trying to pressure us to convert to Christianity or Islam, depending on the era we're talking about. And so we don't do that as Jews. And it's really hard sometimes when we feel a sense of loss or disappointment um, that somehow it reflects on us. And the reality of it is sometimes you can't control who you fall in love with. And it's really that simple. So they might be Jewish in the end, right? They just might turn out to be Jewish. Maybe not on the day of the wedding, but maybe by the day of the bar mitzvah. I have done Jewish wedding ceremonies for people after a conversion of the non-Jewish spouse who wanted to now have a real Jewish wedding, they said. Like, think about that. They fell in love with being Jewish so much they wanted a second wedding, a Jewish wedding. Sherry, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, one thing that I think that Judaism doesn't, or we don't talk about or consider is that, my husband was brought up Catholic and I was brought up Jewish, and we did have a Christmas tree. But I always, the message was that, we respect mom and dad's upbringing and their family. This was important to his family
Yeah.
to celebrate Christmas and do the little traditions, but also to respect, our family and our Jewish traditions. But I only hear this kind of like, wanting to go the Jewish way and not consider that, wait a minute, we get two different people, even culturally, you get two different people and you have to respect that and take it because the children are part of the two people.
Yeah, well, let's also think it takes a lot of hubris for us to assume that our tradition should mean more than someone else's tradition. We got to have a whole lot of ego to say that. And so trying to figure out a way to allow a young couple or a couple of any age, I should have just said a couple of any age to figure out the way that they're going to do it that makes sense to them, I think is surprising. I've run these programs through 18 Doors called Couples in Conversation, and it's a 4-session program with a curriculum where we walk through these kinds of decisions. What is December going to look like in our house, right? I tell people just because you decorate a Christmas tree, it doesn't mean you're celebrating Christmas as Christmas, right? I'm a rabbi and I've decorated lots of trees with my Christian friends. I'm not celebrating Christmas as a religious holiday. I'm celebrating Christmas as a family or my chosen family holiday. And again, let's try to not be afraid of Christmas trees, right? I think that, by the way, whether or not our children grow up to be rabbis or grow up to be completely secular, I got both in my family. I'm a rabbi, and my brother is basically secular. He has a very strong Jewish identity, and we grew up with the same parents. It's kind of hard to predict free will he actually went to more religious school than I did. He went all the way through confirmation as a kid, and when our parents got divorced when I was 12, that's when my Jewish religious education stopped. He went all the way through confirmation in 10th grade. So it's funny that I turned out to be the rabbi, right? So predictability based on anything different than whatever our vision is of who our children are supposed to turn out to be. My parents, my stepfather wanted me to be a judge. I ain't never going to be a judge. I was a disappointment. I was never, I practiced law for 11 years in Las Vegas, and I was never going to be a judge. So children are going to do what they're going to do. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. Sherry?
Rabbi, how do you deal with the in-laws of the family, as far religiously, if you're in a situation where your daughter-in-law or son-in-law has converted,
Yeah.
come over to you, but you have the in-laws over there?
Yeah. Look, imagine that they do convert. Sometimes by the way, I have more conversion students than I've ever had right now. And Shelley is actually very helpful in working with our conversion candidates. There's a huge bump in conversion post-COVID or beginning in COVID and post-COVID. And it's all across the country. All my colleagues have just a lot of people interested in conversion. When I ask people why now, sometimes they'll say, well, I couldn't do it while my parents were still alive. I didn't want to hurt their feelings. That's an interesting one I've gotten multiple times. If the parents are still alive, sometimes they have a relationship with their parents where they don't want to hurt their feelings. Sometimes they have a great relationship. And dealing with your machatonim, your child's in-laws, it's just like everything else in life, I think. It's about communication and respect, right? You got to talk to each other and you got to respect each other. And you got to maybe be a little bendy flexy bendy. It might not be how you envisioned it. Maybe they come for Hanukkah and they go for Christmas. Maybe they, do Easter and they do Passover. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with you going to an Easter dinner either to be with your children and grandchildren at an Easter dinner. It doesn't make you any less Jewish to go have a meal. Doesn't make you any less Jewish. Hi, Stacy, you have your hand up.
Hi, Rabbi. So my daughter Emily is getting married in December to a very nice non-Jewish man. My husband and I are paying for the wedding, and a cantorial soloist is doing is officiating. They've agreed to the ketubah. They've asked for English, not Hebrew, but they've agreed to a lot of the prayers. They're not. Emily's not going to walk around Brian. She's not going to do that. He's going to break the glass. But the one issue we're having is the huppah.
That's not usually the issue I get. And I do
Yeah,
a lot of interfaith
I don't
weddings.
think they
Tell
want.
me,
Well, Brian's a very large man, and I think Emily feels it's really Emily. She wants him to be comfortable, and she wants his family to be comfortable. So they're trying to really make it interfaith, not Jewish.
Yeah.
Because Mark and I are paying for the wedding, I can't tell if I'm being pushy or advocating when it comes to the huppah.
It's a fine line.
And I wondered.
And wait, can I just, I'm going to interrupt you and just say,
Yeah.
it's a fine line that sometimes we only see after the fact, once we've
Yeah.
crossed over.
Yeah. So I just don't know.
Yeah.
I guess how important is the huppah?
Yeah. It's so I think you ask your daughter. Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, please, Stacy, I say this with love and affection. It's not your wedding.
I know.
God bless you for paying for it. God bless you for paying for it. It's an amazing gift to this couple to
I
set
think I
them
knew
on their
that
journey.
answer, but I needed to hear it.
Sometimes we just need, look, I have that too sometimes. I just need to hear it. So it's not your wedding. You are a guest at the wedding, and you are giving the gift of the wedding. And that's hard. Maybe, if, so, I don't require a traditional chuppah. I don't notice how I said that. I don't require a traditional chuppah. So maybe there's an arch or a something that you can see as a chuppah that will make you feel a little bit better. But it really is her wedding. It's their, and I shouldn't have said her wedding. It's their wedding, right? So see what he wants, see what she wants. And it's okay to ask the why question, but you going from advocating to pushy, sometimes it's, you got to stop before you ask it twice. So
Thank you. Thank you very much.
yeah. Hi, Shelley. Comment, question, concern?
I do. I'm a mother of 4 daughters, and I've been very blessed. They've all gotten married. I think maybe using the word chuppah can be offsetting, and she may very well be visualizing this beautiful ceremony under an arch or under some flowers that really is a chuppah without a name. So think of it that way, even if, if you can just get invited to help design wherever they're getting married. But the other thing that I found important was particularly one Interfaith son-in-law, his parents had no knowledge of Judaism. They were absolutely terrified at the wedding. They were so unaccustomed to walking their son down to being under, and there was a huppah. Yeah. And they just needed to be spoken to. Hi, let me guide you through this. Let's talk about this. And at a bris, they were given a role of honor in holding the baby, just so. I've been very lucky. This child is being brought up Jewish, but those parents, how would I feel if I were the parents who were abandoned religiously? So I've been very careful and just, hi, let's talk about this, encouraging my kids to talk to their respective in-laws, explain it. It's scary stuff. What does this mean? How is this different from my tradition? So I think we need to bring that in.
I actually offer to, for my interfaith couples, I offer to meet with the non-Jewish parents. Not every rabbi does that. Let me just say that. But I offer to answer their questions, do a phone call if they want to come in. That has taken some, oh, the rabbi is just a person, right? And she doesn't have those, and she doesn't have this, and she's not wearing black, and she's not judgy, right? So that's one additional strategy in addition to what Shelley said, which excellent advice. The other thing is, Reform Judaism has amazing wedding resources, and just sharing and framing it as, I'm just sharing, we're not trying to convert you. We Jews don't do that. Like I say Jews don't do that a lot to the non-Jewish family members. We don't do that because if someone's coming from a strong Christian tradition. Sometimes they're expecting people to try to convert them to whatever their version of Christianity is. So, you know, just sharing, just giving you the meaning. I have actually recommended, there's an Anita Diamant book called The New Jewish Wedding. There's a second edition now for couples. I've said, you know, why don't you give that to your to the non-Jewish in-laws too, so that they can learn about the Jewish traditions. Sometimes that's very helpful if they're readers. MyJewishLearning.com tends to be reformative in its outlook. So I don't generally recommend everything on My Jewish Learning, but reformjudaism.org has great stuff from a Reform perspective about the meaning behind the different pieces of a Jewish wedding. It can be really helpful. So, all right. Yeah, Shelley, and then Nancy.
Yeah, Nancy, I'm sorry, Nancy. One other thing, I found it more difficult to deal with a son-in-law or an in-law who comes from, I don't believe in God position. It's sometimes easier to deal with a God-believing family because you can point out the traditions we have in common and the beliefs, and even at times use language that they agree with. It's like I only have 2 grandkids who live here, one family, and I like to say at night, you know, may God bless you and keep you to this little girl. She loves to hear it. And I think, oh my God, my son-in-law, his parents would go crazy. So, I mean, I just think it's sometimes easier dealing with someone from another faith than it is with someone who rejects every religious tradition.
Yeah. So, and interestingly, for people who convert from Catholicism, often have an easier time because they're used to ritual. Okay, as opposed to some of the less ritually oriented Christian denominations, sometimes they have a harder time. Also, when we're thinking of people of no faith or atheists or agnostics, that sometimes taking on a God concept can be very difficult in their head or in their household. And then what I have talked to some couples about is just the concept of respecting each other's beliefs, that just as strongly as you believe there is no God, your partner is telling me they believe that there is some sort of God, higher power. And I usually then redefine God for the non-believing partner, and give them the example that God can be, you know, we say we have 100 names for God. And so we don't think about God as the old man sitting on the throne, right? But thinking of God as power or force or energy or flow, or, you know, makom, place or rock, can be very helpful in redefining what God is, as opposed to a Christian-centered vision of God that we see in the movies. So, Nancy Marcus, mother of my dear friend, Rabbi Deborah Marcus.
I was just going to say to Stacy, when Steve and I got married, we were married at Temple Beth Am in Los Angeles, which is conservative. Much to my surprise, there was not a traditional chuppah. They had a heart filled with flowers that was over the bima. And that is what they did at that temple. And it was fine. And then the other thing I was going to say is, I think what we're talking about is just being warm and accepting of families is the key. My son-in-law is a convert to Judaism. His parents are Catholic. He had left the church if he ever went. I don't think so. But, and he insisted on undergoing a full conversion. No pinpricks for him. But when the kids got married, and his family is from Germany, they do not speak English. And we found friends of ours who spoke German, who were able to sit with the 2 aunts and uncles to translate everything that was going on. And another friend was up on the bima with us with his parents to translate for them. And just that little thing of making them feel a part of and warm and welcome, and how thrilled we were that they were there, has led to Let's see, well, they got married the night before ordination, so how many years? 15 years of wonderful family relations. And every time Deb and Sebastian go to Germany to visit, his mother always makes sure to plan Shabbat dinners. So I think it's the approach. So just, that's the key.
It's all about respect, right, Nancy? I mean, that's
Respecting them for who they are, and, you know, for them too, to acknowledge that their son met his Bashert, and it wasn't probably what they wanted, but he's been wonderfully happy. And I think when you go into any relationship with that, it bodes well.
yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Absolutely. I'm going to just comment a little bit on Sherry's comment here about leadership and how we welcome the non-Jewish spouse and create relationships with them. So the Reform movement, many of you know, has been using this phrase for, I don't know, 10 years now, audacious hospitality, right? I see some heads nodding. Audacious hospitality. We're supposed to welcome people in. But if we think about what audacious hospitality means, it means that you're a guest in someone else's home. And so the Reform movement is now rolling out a concept called the culture of belonging. And my congregation here in Tempe is working on, we're participating with URJ on creating a culture of belonging. So think to yourselves, what's the difference between being a guest in someone's home and belonging, right? That it's yours. And so how we choose to make policies that welcome the non-Jewish spouse is really important, right? Oftentimes, when I was in my congregation in Austin, Texas, I was responsible for overseeing 45 B'nai Mitzvah a year. Okay, that's a lot of kids, a lot of families. And so I was meeting with families all the time. And let me just say, I didn't start my conversation with, are you Jewish? Are you both Jewish? And I often didn't find out that the parent that was schlepping every week to B'nai Mitzvah lessons and meetings was the non-Jewish spouse until 2 weeks before, when we got the honor sheet and had to ask questions about a Hebrew name, right? The number of non-Jewish partners who are schlepping, who are raising Jewish kids, is astounding. And congregations everywhere can do better at making the non-Jewish spouse feel at home rather than feeling like they are a guest in our communities. I hope that all communities, all Reformed Jewish communities, work on this cultural belonging concept as we transition to that frame. I think it's a huge mindset shift. You know, since our sacred text, we have had non-Jews that have walked the journey with us. In our sacred texts, we have had non-Jews who are incredibly important in our communities, who walked the journey with us. And figuring out ways to honor them as opposed to segregate them is incredibly important. And if we don't start welcoming all of these interfaith couples into our communities as full active members and treating them with the dignity and respect that they deserve, we're missing out. We are absolutely missing out on all sorts of talent and love for the Jewish people.
Any more questions?
Comments, questions, concerns?
Okay.
If you disagree with me, it's okay to say so. My people don't have any problem with that. But hi, Stacy.
I just wanted to thank you so much. This was wonderful. Brian is such an amazing man. He's just, I can't wait for him to be a member of our family. And I want his family to feel warm and welcome and comfortable. And this was just really helpful. So thank you.
Let me give you one other thing. Look, if the non-Jewish spouse has any interest in learning about Judaism, Reformed congregations all across America do a 3-session class called Taste of Judaism. Okay, it's 3 sessions, 2 hours, 6 hours total. I teach it twice a year. I teach it right before Passover and right before Rosh Hashanah every year. But there are Taste of Judaism classes happening in person and online all over America. And I have grandparents of Jewish kids, right? Non-Jewish grandparents who take it all the time. It's a great class for in-laws, future spouses, non-Jewish current spouses, it's a great class to take with your spouse, just as a refresher. And so let me just recommend that. URJ.org, you just type in Taste of Judaism. There are listings all over America where you can sign up and just say, it's okay to say, I don't know if you're interested in this, but I just found out about it. And here it is. Do with it what you want, right? The key is do with this information what you want rather than you really need to take this. Okay, so it's all about presentation and invitation.
Thank you, Rabbi Olshine. And on behalf of the Pacific District Program Committee, thank you all for coming tonight. I'd also like to thank our techs, Melissa Jacobitz and Shari Carruthers. The program committee is taking September off for the high holidays, but in the coming months, look forward to Diaspora Diaries programs on Ukraine and China, as well as a special Hanukkah treat, a virtual tour of the Chagall windows from Jerusalem. Also, it's 9 months away, but we're looking for innovative members to create the first Shavuot across the PD. We need visionary sisters to organize an inventive and stimulating May 25th experience with participation from throughout the Pacific District. For details, please contact me at wendyblack.pdprog@gmail.com. Hope you have a wonderful remainder of your summer. Stay cool. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to my Tempe people. Thank you so much. Thanks,
Terrific
Max.
program.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Barb. Thanks, Shelley.
Great.